At its height, medieval Baghdad was larger than ancient Rome at the peak of its power. It was wealthier than Constantinople, more literate than Athens in its Golden Age, and more culturally diverse than Alexandria. For 2 centuries, this single city produced more scientific and mathematical innovations than all of medieval Europe combined. Scholars there knew the Earth was round and had calculated its circumference with remarkable accuracy, while European maps still showed dragons at the edge of a flat world. But empires and statistics tell us nothing about actual human experience. What was it like to walk those legendary streets, to live and work in the shadow of the Caliph's palace, to raise a family in the world's most cosmopolitan city? Let's travel back to the Golden Age and discover the real Baghdad, from morning prayers to midnight storytellers. In the scorching Arabian summer of 632, a new faith began its explosive journey across the ancient world. Islam, revealed to the Prophet Muhammad in the desert city of Mecca, would transform the political and cultural landscape of the Middle East in a way no one could have predicted. Within a decade of Muhammad's death, Arab armies had swept across the Levant and Persia, carrying their message to millions. By 700, Islamic rule stretched from Spain to the borders of India. But who would govern this vast empire? The first dynasty to attempt the task was the Umayyads, who established their capital in Damascus around 661. From this ancient Syrian city, they ruled for nearly a century, but their reign was marked by growing tensions. The Umayyads favored Arab Muslims over non-Arab converts, creating a rigid hierarchy that bred resentment across their territories. Persian Muslims, in particular, chafed under a system that treated them as second-class citizens despite their adoption of the faith. The discontent ran deeper still. Many Muslims, especially those who traced their lineage to the Prophet's family, believed the Umayyads had seized power illegitimately. They whispered in marketplaces and gathered in secret, dreaming of a dynasty that would honor the Prophet's bloodline and rule with greater justice. These whispers found their answer in the Abbasid family, descendants of the Prophet's uncle Abbas. Throughout the 740s, they orchestrated a brilliant campaign, building support among disaffected Persian Muslims and promising a return to the pure principles of Islam. Their black banners became symbols of revolution, appearing in territories from Persia to Arabia. The revolution erupted in 748 in the province of Khorasan in eastern Persia. Abbasid forces, led by the capable general Abu Muslim, swept westward with surprising speed. The Umayyad armies, weakened by internal divisions and the loyalty they had squandered, crumbled before them. By 750, the last Umayyad caliph fled Damascus and the Abbasids claimed the throne. The first Abbasid caliph, Abu al-Abbas, faced an immediate question: where should the new dynasty plant its roots? Damascus carried too many Umayyad associations. The victorious revolution needed a fresh symbol, a city that would embody the new order. Abu al-Abbas established a temporary capital, but his brother and successor, al-Mansur, who took power in 754, understood that something more permanent was required. Al-Mansur spent years searching. He traveled the Tigris and Euphrates valleys, consulting engineers and astrologers, studying trade routes and climate patterns. He needed a location that balanced military security with commercial opportunity, a place where East and West could meet. In 762, on the western bank of the Tigris River, he found what he was looking for. What he would build there would become the jewel of the medieval world. The site al-Mansur selected lay in the heart of Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers. Here, the Tigris curved gently, creating natural defenses while offering access to the great waterways that connected Persia to the Mediterranean. Ancient canals crisscrossed the region, remnants of Babylonian and Sasanian irrigation systems that could support a large population. Perhaps most importantly, the location sat at the crossroads of trade routes linking India, China, and Africa with the markets of the West. But why build a round city? No major metropolis in the Islamic world, or indeed anywhere in the known world at that time, had attempted such a radical design. Al-Mansur's vision drew on deep symbolic and practical considerations. The circle represented perfection in Islamic mathematics and philosophy, a form without beginning or end, echoing the divine unity at the heart of the faith. Militarily, a circular wall offered superior defensive advantages, allowing guards to survey approaches from all directions with equal ease. The Caliph summoned the greatest minds of his realm to refine the plan. Mathematicians calculated precise circumferences and angles. Astrologers consulted the stars, selecting 762 as an auspicious year to break ground. Engineers from Persia, who had inherited the sophisticated building traditions of the Sasanian Empire, brought expertise in large-scale construction. The city would have double walls, each rising 40 feet high, with the inner wall taller than the outer, creating concentric rings of protection. How does one build a city for 100,000 workers? Al-Mansur mobilized labor forces from across his empire, drawing on the tradition of corvée labor common throughout the ancient world. Brickmakers worked around the clock, producing millions upon millions of mud bricks baked in the Mesopotamian sun. Stone cutters shaped massive blocks for foundations and gates. Craftsmen arrived from Syria, Egypt, and Persia, bringing specialized skills in metalwork, carpentry, and decorative arts. The design centered on absolute symmetry. 4 great gates pierced the outer walls, each aligned with the cardinal directions and named for the territory it faced. The Kufa gate opened south toward Arabia. The Basra gate pointed southeast toward the Persian Gulf. The Khorasan gate faced northeast toward Central Asia and the source of Abbasid military power. The Syria gate looked west toward the Mediterranean world. Each gate was not merely an entrance, but a fortified complex, topped with golden domes that caught the sun and announced the city's grandeur to approaching travelers. Between the outer and inner walls, a broad ring held markets, workshops, and residential quarters for the common populace. But the inner circle remained reserved for the Caliph and his administration. At the very center rose Al-Mansur's palace, crowned with a massive green dome visible for miles across the flat Mesopotamian plain. This positioning was no accident. The Caliph literally stood at the axis of his empire, with all roads leading to his throne. Construction consumed 4 years and resources that staggered even contemporary observers. Arab historians recorded that al-Mansur spent 4,833 gold dinars on the project, a sum that represented a significant portion of the Caliphate's annual revenue. The Caliph himself reportedly lived on site, supervising progress and making constant adjustments to the plans. By 766, the round city stood complete. Al-Mansur named it Madinat al-Salam, the City of Peace. But the world would know it by another name, derived from the Persian words for God's gift. Baghdad had arrived. Peace proved more crowded than anyone anticipated. Within months of the round city's completion, Al-Mansur confronted a problem that would define Baghdad's next 2 decades. His perfect geometric creation could not contain the explosive energy it had unleashed. The markets came first. What began as orderly commerce within the ring between the walls quickly descended into chaos. Merchants, artisans, and customers packed the circular corridors until movement became nearly impossible. The noise, the smells of cooking food and animal dung, the constant haggling and shouting, all this disrupted the serene administrative center al-Mansur had envisioned. More troubling still, the Caliph worried about fire. Those millions of mud bricks might not burn, but the wooden stalls and fabric awnings created a tinderbox encircling his palace. In 768, al-Mansur made a decisive move. He ordered the markets expelled from the Round City entirely. Merchants protested, but the Caliph's will prevailed. The souks relocated beyond the outer walls, spreading across the surrounding landscape like water breaching a dam. This exodus transformed Baghdad from a single enclosed entity into something unprecedented, a sprawling metropolitan region. The Kark district emerged on the western bank of the Tigris, growing around the relocated markets. Here, in neighborhoods bearing names like the Perfume Sellers Quarter and the Silk Bazaar, craftsmen organized themselves by trade. Coppersmith hammers rang beside leather workers' shops. Spice merchants displayed pyramids of saffron, cardamom, and black pepper brought from lands weeks of travel away. The district developed its own character, earthier and more chaotic than the planned perfection of the Round City. But al-Mansur's own family complicated his vision of centralized control. His son and heir, al-Mahdi, chafed at living in his father's shadow. In 770, the Caliph made a fateful concession. On the eastern bank of the Tigris, directly opposite the Round City, he granted al-Mahdi permission to build his own palace complex. This settlement took the name Rusafa after a famous Umayyad palace in Syria. Around al-Mahdi's residence, a second urban center coalesced. Courtiers built mansions. Soldiers constructed barracks. Markets arose to serve this eastern population. The Tigris now divided a single city into 2 distinct halves. How would they connect? Boats had always ferried passengers across, but a metropolis demanded more. Engineers proposed pontoon bridges, massive structures of boats lashed together and covered with wooden planking. Construction required extraordinary coordination. During the spring floods, when the Tigris swelled with snowmelt from Armenian mountains, these bridges had to be dismantled and rebuilt as waters receded. Despite the challenge, 3 major bridges soon linked Kark and Rusafa, and Baghdad became truly unified. The population explosion defied all projections. People flooded in from every corner of the Abbasid realm and beyond. Persian scholars arrived seeking patronage. Arab tribal families relocated from the provinces. Jewish merchants established communities. Christian scribes found employment in government offices. Craftsmen from Syria, farmers from Iraq's countryside, soldiers from Khorasan, all converged on this city that promised opportunity. By 780, contemporary estimates suggested Baghdad housed 300,000 people, making it perhaps the largest city west of China. The figure would triple again within a generation. Suburbs sprawled in every direction, each developing its own mosques, bathhouses, and markets. Al-Mansur had built a perfect circle. But perfection, it turned out, could not contain human ambition, commerce, or the sheer vital chaos of urban life. Baghdad had outgrown its walls before they were 20 years old. When al-Mansur died in 775 during a pilgrimage to Mecca, power passed smoothly to his son al-Mahdi, then to al-Mahdi's son al-Hadi. But it was al-Hadi's younger brother, ascending the throne in 786, who would transform Baghdad from merely impressive to legendary. His name was Harun, and history would remember him by the epithet al-Rashid, the rightly guided. Harun inherited an empire at its zenith and a city bursting with potential. Where his grandfather had built walls and his father had built palaces, Harun would build something more intangible but infinitely more powerful, a reputation that would echo through centuries. The Caliph who features in the 1001 Nights, wandering his capital in disguise, was no mere literary invention. Harun truly did govern the wealthiest city on earth. How wealthy? The state treasury overflowed with revenues that staggered imagination. From Spain to Central Asia, taxes poured into Baghdad's coffers. Gold dinars stamped with Harun's name circulated from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. The Caliph's personal income exceeded 900 million dirhams annually, a sum no European monarch could fathom. This wealth transformed into spectacle. Palace ceremonies featured elaborate displays, mechanical trees with singing golden birds, pools of mercury that shimmered like living silver, carpets so fine they took years to weave. The Abbasid court became a magnet for talent. Poets competed for Harun's favor, knowing a single well-crafted verse might earn them bags of gold. Musicians played instruments from distant lands. Scholars debated philosophy while servants circulated with refreshments on jeweled platters. The Caliph himself could recite poetry from memory and appreciated theological nuance, though his tastes ran equally to luxury and pleasure. For years, Harun entrusted governance to a Persian family that would become nearly as famous as the Caliph himself. The Barmakids had served the Abbasids since before Baghdad's founding, and under Harun they reached unprecedented power. Yahya ibn Khalid al-Barmaki served as vizier, effectively running the empire's daily affairs. His sons Fadl and Jafar held crucial positions, with Jafar becoming Harun's closest companion. They built lavish mansions, patronized poets and scholars, and displayed generosity that became proverbial. To receive Barmakid hospitality meant entering a world of silk curtains, rare perfumes, and endless courses of exquisite food. But court intrigue has its hazards. In 803, for reasons never fully explained, Harun suddenly turned against his trusted advisors. In a single night, he had Jafar executed, imprisoned Yahya and Fadiel, and confiscated the family's enormous wealth. Some claim Jafar had violated the Caliph's trust. Others whispered of court factions and jealous rivals. The truth vanished with the Barmakids themselves. Their fall sent shockwaves through Baghdad, a reminder that even at the summit of power, favor could evaporate like morning dew. While court politics played out in palace halls, Baghdad's importance rested on more than ceremony. The city had become the axis of world trade. Caravans arrived daily from China bearing silk, porcelain, and paper. Ships docked at Basra loaded with pepper, cinnamon, and pearls from India. Merchants from East Africa brought ivory and gold. From the north came furs, amber, and slaves. All these goods flowed through Baghdad's markets, enriching the merchants who traded them and the government that taxed them. Harun even reached across the known world to establish diplomatic relations with Charlemagne, the Frankish king crowned emperor in 800. The two rulers exchanged embassies and gifts. Harun sent the emperor an elephant named Abul Abbas, clocks that marked hours with mechanical precision, and luxurious textiles. These gifts from Baghdad amazed the Frankish court, demonstrating the gulf between civilizations. In 809, Harun died while campaigning in Khorasan, far from the city he had made. The new caliph who took power in 813 possessed an intellectual hunger that would reshape not just Baghdad, but human knowledge itself. Al-Mamun, son of Harun al-Rashid, cared less for mechanical singing birds than for understanding why birds could fly at all. Where his father had collected poets, al-Mamun would collect every book ever written. The young caliph had grown up during Harun's Golden Age, watching wealth flow into Baghdad from every direction. But al-Mamun saw something his predecessors had missed. Yes, the markets overflowed with silk and spices, but what about wisdom? The Greeks had studied the stars and written treatises on medicine. The Persians possessed ancient astronomical tables. Indian mathematicians had developed revolutionary concepts. All this knowledge existed in scattered manuscripts, gathering dust in distant libraries written in languages most scholars could not read. What if Baghdad became not just the richest city, but the most learned? What if all human knowledge could be gathered, translated, and preserved in one place? Around 830, al-Mamun founded an institution that would become legendary. Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. Located in Baghdad's scholarly quarter, this was far more than a library. It was an academy, a translation bureau, an observatory, and a research center all combined. The caliph poured resources into it with the same enthusiasm his father had spent on palace decorations. The first priority was acquiring manuscripts. Al-Mamun dispatched agents across the known world with a simple mission: find books. They purchased Greek philosophical texts from Byzantine monasteries. They copied Persian medical treatises from Sasanian archives. They sought out Sanskrit mathematical works from India. Some accounts claim the caliph even demanded manuscripts as part of peace treaties with the Byzantines, valuing ancient knowledge above gold. But books in Greek or Sanskrit served little purpose if no one could read them. Al-Mamun assembled teams of translators, paying them not by the day, but by the weight of completed translations. A single scholar might earn as much translating Aristotle as a merchant earned shipping spices. The most talented translator, Hunayn ibn Ishaq, reportedly received gold equal to the weight of each book he rendered into Arabic. He translated Galen's medical works, Ptolemy's astronomy, and Euclid's geometry, checking multiple Greek manuscripts to ensure accuracy. The translation movement transformed Baghdad into a crossroads of intellectual traditions. Christian scholars worked alongside Muslims and Jews, united by curiosity rather than divided by faith. A translator might spend mornings rendering Plato from Greek, afternoons discussing the text with philosophers, and evenings comparing interpretations. Knowledge flowed in multiple directions. Greek philosophy met Islamic theology. Persian astronomy merged with Indian mathematics, and from these encounters emerged entirely new insights. Mathematics flourished spectacularly. Scholars at the House of Wisdom did not merely preserve Indian numerals, they advanced them. The concept of zero, borrowed from India, was refined and systematized. Al-Khwarizmi, working under al-Mamun's patronage, wrote treatises that gave us the very word algorithm from his name and algebra from his book title. His work on solving equations would influence mathematics for 1,000 years. Astronomy drove some of the House of Wisdom's most ambitious projects. Al-Mamun ordered the construction of an observatory where scholars mapped the stars with unprecedented precision. They measured the Earth's circumference by having teams travel north and south, calculating how the angle of the sun changed. Their result came remarkably close to modern measurements. They corrected Ptolemy's calculations, tracked planetary movements, and compiled astronomical tables that sailors would use for centuries. Medicine advanced through systematic observation and experimentation. Physicians translated Galen and Hippocrates, then built upon their work. They established hospitals in Baghdad where doctors studied diseases, tested treatments, and trained new practitioners. Medical knowledge became standardized, written down in comprehensive texts that covered everything from surgery to pharmacology. By the time al-Mamun died in 833, he had spent 20 years transforming Baghdad into something unprecedented. A city where the accumulated wisdom of multiple civilizations could be studied, compared. The House of Wisdom would continue for centuries, but its golden age reflected al-Mamun's vision. He had proven that knowledge like gold could. The scholars who worked within the House of Wisdom transformed abstract knowledge into practical breakthroughs that would echo across centuries. Chief among them stood Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, a Persian mathematician whose name would literally enter the English language. Working in Baghdad during the 820s and 30s, al-Khwarizmi wrote a revolutionary treatise titled The Compendious Book on Calculation by Completion and Balancing. The Arabic word for completion, al-Jabr, would become algebra. What made al-Khwarizmi's work revolutionary? He created a systematic method for solving equations using abstract symbols rather than specific numbers. Before him, mathematical problems required concrete examples. If you had 12 apples and gave away 5, how many remained? Al-Khwarizmi introduced the concept of unknowns, of solving for x, of manipulating equations regardless of what they represented. A merchant could use his methods to calculate profit. An engineer could determine the dimensions needed for a bridge. The applications were limitless because the mathematics was universal. While al-Khwarizmi revolutionized mathematics, 3 brothers turned theory into mechanical reality. The Banu Musa brothers, Ahmad, Muhammad, and Hassan, represented Baghdad's unique blend of scholarly rigor and practical innovation. They studied Greek texts on mechanics and hydraulics, then built devices that seemed almost magical. Their book of ingenious devices described over 100 mechanical inventions. Automated fountains that never ran dry, oil lamps that adjusted their own wicks, trick vessels that poured different liquids from the same container. One of their most remarkable inventions was a device to measure the length of curved lines, essentially an early analog computer. They designed valves that controlled water flow with precision, creating self-filling vessels and fountains that played music through carefully calibrated water pressure. Were these mere toys for wealthy patrons? No. The mathematical principles behind their devices would influence everything from irrigation systems to early clocks. But perhaps no scholar embodied Baghdad's medical revolution more completely than Abu Bakr al-Razi, known in the West as Rhazes. Born in 865 in Persia, al-Razi arrived in Baghdad when the city's hospitals were becoming centers of systematic medical research. He approached medicine with a philosopher's skepticism and a scientist's rigor. Why accept ancient authorities without question? Why not observe, record, and experiment? Al-Razi's greatest contribution came from careful observation during a smallpox epidemic. He wrote the first clinical description distinguishing smallpox from measles, two diseases previously lumped together. His precise observations of symptoms, progression, and treatment outcomes established a methodology that felt remarkably modern. He documented case studies, recorded which treatments worked and which failed, and revised his conclusions based on evidence. The Baghdad medical community revolutionized surgery as well. Physicians developed specialized instruments, refined surgical techniques, and established standards for cleanliness that would not reappear in Europe for centuries. They used opium and other substances for anesthesia, understanding that pain relief aided recovery. Yet not all of Baghdad's intellectual energy flowed harmoniously. The philosopher al-Kindi, working during the mid-900s, found himself caught in fierce debates between rationalists and traditionalists. Could human reason comprehend divine truth? Should Muslims study Greek philosophy, or did it contradict revelation? Al-Kindi argued passionately for the compatibility of philosophy and faith, but conservative theologians pushed back. These debates sometimes turned bitter, with scholars losing patronage or facing persecution for unorthodox views. The tension between rational inquiry and religious orthodoxy would shape Baghdad's intellectual life for generations. But in the mid-900s, the scales still tipped toward curiosity. The scholars had transformed their city into something unprecedented, a place where asking questions mattered more than accepting answers, where knowledge from distant lands merged into new understanding, where the practical and theoretical advanced together. The scholars had transformed knowledge. Now merchants would transform that knowledge into wealth. By the 900s, Baghdad's markets had evolved into something unprecedented in human history, a commercial hub where goods from China, India, Persia, Arabia, and Africa converged in specialized bazaars stretching for miles along both banks of the Tigris. The Great Bazaar was not one market, but dozens, each dedicated to a single trade. Walk through the perfume souk, and the air itself became commodity. Frankincense from Oman, musk from Tibet, rosewater from Shiraz. The scents mingled into an intoxicating haze that merchants claimed could reveal a person's wealth by how long they lingered. Move 50 paces and you entered the silk market, where Chinese merchants displayed bolts of fabric so fine that entire robes could pass through a finger ring. Persian silk competed with imports from Byzantium, each vendor claiming superiority while fingers tested the weave and haggling echoed off vaulted ceilings. What made these specializations necessary? Volume. Baghdad's population had swollen past 300,000 souls, making it the largest city west of China. Every day, thousands of transactions occurred. A customer seeking copper pots knew exactly where to find them, the metalworkers' quarter, where hammers rang from dawn until dusk. Need books? The papermakers' market stood near the scribes' quarter, where calligraphers copied everything from Qurans to Greek philosophy. This geographic organization transformed shopping from chaos into system. The spice market exemplified Baghdad's reach across continents. Black pepper from India's Malabar coast sold alongside cinnamon from Ceylon, cloves from distant islands most Baghdadis could never locate on a map. These tiny seeds and dried barks commanded prices exceeding their weight in silver. Why such value? They masked the taste of preserved meat, demonstrated wealth at feasts, and served in medicines. A merchant who controlled spice routes controlled liquid gold. But not all commodities arrived wrapped in silk or scented with perfume. The slave markets formed a darker pillar of Baghdad's economy. Each Thursday, dealers displayed human beings captured in war, seized by raiders, or sold by desperate families. Slavic peoples from the north, Africans from the south, Turks from the east. Some became domestic servants in wealthy households. Others, particularly those with education, served as tutors or administrators. The military purchased young men for training as soldiers. The market's existence revealed an uncomfortable truth. Baghdad's golden age rested partly on bound labor. The Caliph's government recognized that such vast commercial activity required regulation. Market inspectors, called muhtasibs, patrolled the bazaars with authority to punish fraud. They carried standardized weights and measures, checking that merchants did not cheat customers. A baker caught selling underweight bread faced public humiliation and fines. A fabric dealer who misrepresented cotton as silk might have his goods confiscated. These inspectors also enforced price controls on essential goods like bread and oil, preventing merchants from exploiting shortages. The muhtasib served another function, maintaining public morality. They ensured separation between male and female shoppers in certain markets, punished public drunkenness, and mediated disputes between merchants and customers. Their presence meant that commerce operated within social and religious boundaries, that profit did not override propriety. Yet for all this regulation, the markets thrived on negotiation. Every price was an opening bid. Every sale concluded with tea shared between buyer and seller. The bazaars hummed with a rhythm that transcended mere economics. They were where Baghdad's diversity collided daily, where a Persian perfume seller might argue with an Arab spice merchant while a Chinese silk trader looked on, where the world's goods and peoples mingled in magnificent chaotic exchange. But wealth attracted danger, and by the late 900s, threats gathered beyond Baghdad's walls. How did merchants move goods worth fortunes across thousands of miles without carrying chests of coins? The answer transformed commerce itself. While the bazaars bustled with daily haggling, Baghdad's merchant class was inventing financial instruments that would shape global trade for centuries. The foundation was the gold dinar. Minted to exacting standards set by the Caliph's treasury, these coins contained precisely 4.25 grams of pure gold. A merchant in distant Cordoba knew that a Baghdad dinar held identical value to one struck in Cairo or Damascus. This standardization created something revolutionary, a truly international currency. Caravans carried dinars from the Atlantic to the borders of China, and everywhere they went, people trusted their worth. But even gold presented problems. Bandits haunted trade routes. A merchant carrying enough dinars to purchase a shipload of Chinese porcelain was a walking target. The solution emerged from necessity, the saftaja, or letter of credit. A merchant depositing funds with a banker in Baghdad received a sealed document. Upon reaching Basra or even distant Samarkand, he presented this letter to a corresponding agent and received local currency. The physical gold never traveled, only the promise of it. This system required something more valuable than gold: trust. Banking families built reputations over generations. The Banu Musa clan operated branches in 12 cities across the Abbasid realm. Their word guaranteed payment. Break that trust once, and a family's commercial network collapsed. So they honored their letters with religious devotion, and commerce flowed on rivers of paper rather than streams of metal. Merchants also pioneered the kirad, a partnership contract that distributed both investment and risk. A wealthy trader might provide capital while a younger merchant contributed labor and expertise. Profits were split according to predetermined shares, typically 2/3 to the investor and 1/3 to the traveling partner. If disaster struck and the goods were lost, the investor absorbed the financial loss while the merchant lost only his time and effort. This arrangement allowed ambitious young men without capital to enter long-distance trade while spreading risk among multiple investors. The greatest merchant families accumulated staggering wealth through these instruments. The Bani Kura dynasty controlled trade routes from the Mediterranean to India. Their patriarch owned 17 ships, maintained warehouses in 6 cities, and employed hundreds of agents. Their Baghdad mansion featured marble from Byzantine quarries, carpets from Persia, and furniture inlaid with African ivory. Yet they started 3 generations earlier with a single camel and determination. These financial innovations did more than enrich individuals. They created an interconnected commercial web spanning continents. A merchant in Baghdad might invest in a shipment of African gold that would purchase Chinese silk, which would sell in Damascus to buy Spanish silver, which would return to Baghdad as dinars. Money circled the known world, always seeking profit, always creating connections. But such vast wealth concentrated in private hands worried the caliphs. As the year 1000 approached, tensions between political power and merchant independence would test whether Baghdad's golden age could endure. The clang of hammers on metal rang through Baghdad's industrial quarters long before dawn broke. In workshops lining the Tigris, craftsmen were already at work, their skills transforming raw materials into objects of beauty and utility that would travel farther than most people could imagine. Paper changed everything. Before the 8th century, knowledge traveled on heavy parchment or fragile papyrus. Then Chinese prisoners captured at the Battle of Talas revealed their secret, pulping plant fibers into thin, durable sheets. Baghdad's craftsmen perfected the technique. By the year 800, paper mills lined the river's eastern bank, their water wheels powering enormous wooden hammers that pounded linen rags and hemp into pulp. The smell of sizing, a mixture of starch and gelatin brushed onto dried sheets, hung permanently in the air. A single papermaker could produce 50 sheets daily, each costing a fraction of parchment's price. This abundance transformed literacy itself. Books multiplied. Students could afford their own copies of texts. Merchants maintained detailed accounts. Government bureaucrats generated endless documentation. The famous booksellers' market, the Souk al-Warakin, stretched for nearly half a mile, with over 100 shops selling everything from Aristotle's philosophy to Persian poetry. Yet paper was merely one thread in Baghdad's manufacturing tapestry. In the textile district, weavers worked silk threads so fine that 20,000 individual strands created a single robe. These fabrics, dyed with precious indigo from India or crimson from Mediterranean insects, sold for prices exceeding a common laborer's annual wages. Master weavers guarded their patterns jealously, passing designs through family lines like inheritances. Metalworkers achieved equal renown. In dim workshops, craftsmen inlaid bronze ewers with silver wire, creating geometric patterns so precise they appeared mechanical rather than handmade. The technique, called damaskining, required years to master. An apprentice might spend his first 3 years simply learning to prepare surfaces properly before touching precious metals. Ceramic workshops produced another marvel: lusterware. Potters applied metallic glazes that, when fired in oxygen-starved kilns, produced surfaces that shimmered gold and ruby red. The exact temperatures and timing remained closely guarded secrets. A single degree too hot, a moment too long, and months of work became worthless shards. These crafts organized around guilds that controlled quality, training, and market access. A young apprentice, typically beginning around age 12, might study 7 years before producing his masterwork, the piece that would determine whether guild elders accepted him as a full craftsman. The system ensured quality but also exclusivity. Guild membership often passed from father to son, creating dynasties of skill. The goods these artisans created did more than generate wealth. They broadcast Baghdad's sophistication across the medieval world. When a Spanish caliph drank from a Baghdad glass goblet, when a Byzantine princess wore silk from the city's looms, they held evidence of a civilization at its zenith, where human hands could transform humble materials into objects approaching perfection. Baghdad awoke each day to a symphony of prayers rising from different corners of the same city. The Muslim call to prayer echoed from minarets, while church bells rang in Christian quarters, and the shofars sounded from synagogues on holy days. This was no accident of geography, but rather a deliberate policy that made the city unlike any other in the medieval world. The Timmy system formed the legal foundation of this coexistence. Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians, recognized as people of the book, paid a special tax called the jizya in exchange for protection and the right to practice their faiths openly. While modern sensibilities might balk at such inequality, the arrangement was remarkably progressive for its era. In contemporary Europe, non-Christians faced forced conversion or expulsion. In Baghdad, they thrived. The Christian community wielded influence far beyond their numbers. Nestorian Christians who had fled Byzantine persecution centuries earlier operated schools and hospitals throughout the city. Their physicians became legendary, with families like the Buktishu serving as personal doctors to caliphs for 7 consecutive generations. These Christian scholars possessed something invaluable: knowledge of Greek texts. When Caliph al-Mamun established the House of Wisdom, he relied heavily on Nestorian translators who could render Aristotle and Galen from Greek into Arabic. The greatest among them, Hunayn ibn Ishaq, personally translated over 100 works while also writing original medical treatises. The Jewish community centered around an extraordinary figure, the Exilarch. This hereditary leader claimed descent from King David himself and lived in palatial splendor, maintaining a court that rivaled minor princes. When the Exilarch traveled through Baghdad, Muslim officials stood in respect. His authority extended across Jewish communities from Spain to Persia, settling disputes and appointing judges. The position carried such prestige that competing claimants sometimes sparked bitter succession battles that drew in the caliphs themselves. Jewish scholars contributed particularly to banking and commerce. The Radhanites, Jewish merchants, operated trade networks spanning from France to China, communicating in multiple languages and moving freely across religious boundaries. Their financial expertise proved essential to Baghdad's economy. When Muslims needed loans, Islamic law forbidding interest often led them to Jewish bankers who faced no such restrictions. But the true magic happened in quieter spaces. libraries where Muslim, Christian, and Jewish scholars debated philosophy, medical schools where students of all faiths studied anatomy together, astronomical observatories where calculations mattered more than creed. A Muslim mathematician might refine a theorem begun by a Christian colleague who had built upon work by a Jewish predecessor. Knowledge flowed across faith lines with remarkable fluidity. Even the city's physical layout reflected this diversity. While Muslims dominated certain quarters, Christian neighborhoods clustered around churches, and Jewish areas surrounded their synagogues, the boundaries remained porous. Markets mixed believers freely. A Muslim might buy bread from a Christian baker, who purchased his flour from a Jewish merchant. Daily commerce created countless moments of ordinary interaction that gradually built mutual understanding. This cosmopolitan experiment faced tensions, certainly. Occasional riots flared. Some Muslim scholars preached against excessive fraternization. Yet Baghdad's rulers generally maintained tolerance, recognizing that the city's prosperity depended on its diversity. The intellectual flowering that would define Islamic civilization emerged not from isolation, but from conversation across faiths and cultures. As the 10th century progressed, this delicate balance would face new challenges. But for now, Baghdad stood as proof that different beliefs could share the same streets, the same markets, even the same pursuit of knowledge. The typical Baghdad home revealed as much about social class as any official census. The wealthy inhabited spacious courtyard houses, built of fired brick and arranged around central open spaces where fountains splashed and fruit trees offered shade. These courtyards served as the heart of family life, a private oasis hidden behind austere exterior walls. Women moved freely within these spaces, managing households that might include extended family, servants, and slaves. The architecture itself spoke to Islamic values of privacy, narrow windows facing outward, grand spaces within, creating a sharp distinction between public and private realms. Walk through the carved wooden door of such a mansion, and you entered another world. Cool stone floors, decorated with geometric patterns, offered relief from the heat. Reception rooms featured low divans piled with cushions where male guests gathered for conversation and refreshment. Separate quarters housed the women and children, accessible only to male family members. In summer, families slept on flat roofs to catch evening breezes. In winter, braziers warmed rooms while heavy curtains kept drafts at bay. The poor inhabited a starkly different reality. Laborers and craftsmen crowded into multi-story tenements built of sun-dried mud brick. Several families might share a single building, with communal courtyards far smaller than their wealthy counterparts. These neighborhoods pressed close together, narrow streets barely wide enough for two people to pass. Yet even here, certain amenities remained universal: access to public fountains, proximity to mosques, and the rhythms of prayer that structured each day. Those prayers divided time itself into measurable segments. Before dawn, the first call to prayer stirred the city. Bakers lit their ovens while water carriers filled their goatskin bags at the Tigris. The markets opened shortly after sunrise, and by mid-morning, Baghdad hummed with commerce. Craftsmen worked their trades in street-facing shops where customers could watch production firsthand. Coppersmiths hammered sheets into bowls. Weavers worked their looms. Scribes copied manuscripts in careful calligraphy. The public baths or hammams served as vital social centers. Men and women bathed separately, with different hours allocated to each. Inside, the progression through increasingly hot rooms cleansed more than just bodies. Business deals were negotiated in the steam rooms. Political alliances formed. Gossip circulated. Bath attendants worked as masseurs and barbers, knowing everyone's affairs. A man's position could be judged by his bathhouse companions and the quality of the towels he brought. Neighborhoods developed fierce identities centered around their mosques. Each district had its own markets, its own hammam, its own character. Residents rarely needed to leave their quarter for daily necessities. This localism bred loyalty but also rivalry. Football matches between neighborhoods could spark brawls. Disputes over water access or market boundaries sometimes required the caliph's intervention. Yet, certain rhythms unified all classes and quarters. The call to midday prayer paused commerce. Shops closed. Streets emptied as men headed to mosques and women spread prayer rugs at home. Afterward, during the hottest hours, the city slowed. Many napped or sought shade. Activity resumed in late afternoon and continued into evening when cooler temperatures made streets pleasant. Night markets operated under torchlight, offering food and entertainment. The work week ended on Thursday afternoon, when families prepared for Friday, the Muslim day of communal prayer. Even non-Muslims felt this rhythm. The Great Friday Mosque drew thousands, where imams delivered sermons that mixed religious instruction with news and political commentary. Here, the caliph's policies reached ordinary ears and public sentiment could be gauged. This was Baghdad at its most human scale. Not the grand mosques or learned debates, but the daily negotiations of family, faith, and neighborhood that bound hundreds of thousands into a single breathing city. The banquet tables of Harun al-Rashid's court groaned under dishes that would seem fantastical even to modern palates. Peacocks roasted whole and redressed in their iridescent plumage. Fish hauled live from the Tigris and prepared in 20 different styles. Lamb stuffed with dried fruits and nuts, swimming in sauces perfumed with rosewater and musk. These feasts weren't merely meals but demonstrations of power, proof that the caliph commanded resources from every corner of his empire. The wealthy of Baghdad transformed eating into an art form. A single banquet might feature 30 courses, each designed to stimulate different senses and humors according to medical theory. Cold dishes balanced hot ones. Sweet followed savory. Drinks ranged from chilled sherbet to fermented date wine, though religious scholars debated alcohol's permissibility. Guests reclined on cushions around low tables, eating with their right hands from communal platters, a practice that encouraged conversation and reinforced social bonds. What made Baghdad's cuisine revolutionary was its fusion of traditions. Persian rice dishes met Arab roasted meats. Byzantine bread techniques combined with Indian spice knowledge. The city's cooks pioneered new methods, layering flavors, balancing sweet and sour, using nuts to create texture. Cookbooks began appearing in the 9th century, documenting recipes that had previously passed only through kitchen apprenticeships. These texts reveal astonishing sophistication, with precise measurements and detailed instructions for achieving specific tastes and consistencies. Spices defined wealth. Black pepper from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, cloves from distant islands most Baghdadis could never locate on a map. Saffron, worth more than silver, turned rice golden and added subtle flavor. Wealthy households maintained spice cabinets as carefully guarded as jewelry boxes. A pinch of cardamom could elevate a simple dish into something memorable. Cumin, coriander, and turmeric appeared in countless variations, each cook developing signature blends. Sugar transformed desserts from simple honey cakes into elaborate confections. Candy makers created sugar sculptures for special occasions. They candied fruits and nuts, producing treats that could last months. Halva, made from sesame and sugar, became so popular that entire markets specialized in its production. One could buy it plain or studded with pistachios, flavored with rosewater or orange blossom. In summer, the wealthy enjoyed an almost unbelievable luxury. Runners carried blocks packed in straw from mountain peaks, racing to reach Baghdad before everything melted. This ice-chilled drinks and created early forms of sorbet. The expense meant only the richest could afford this cooling refreshment during brutal summer months. Yet, most Baghdadis ate far simpler fare. Street vendors sold flatbread hot from clay ovens. Lentil stews bubbled in pots over charcoal fires. Grilled kebabs of mutton or chicken, seasoned with cumin and salt, fed workers too busy for sit-down meals. Yogurt, dates, and cheese provided protein for those who couldn't afford meat daily. The Tigris yielded carp and catfish for Friday dinners. Common families ate well by historical standards, but rarely tasted the saffron and peacock that graced palace tables. This culinary divide reflected Baghdad itself, a city where extraordinary luxury and ordinary life existed side by side, where innovation flourished among the elite while traditional foods sustained the masses who built and maintained their remarkable civilization. Behind ornate screens and garden walls, the women of Baghdad shaped their city's destiny in ways that defied simple categorization. While Islamic law prescribed certain restrictions, the reality of women's lives proved far more complex and varied than later stereotypes would suggest. At the pinnacle of society stood women who wielded genuine political power. Zubaydah, wife of Harun al-Rashid, commanded her own fortune and spent it building public works throughout the empire. She financed wells along the pilgrimage route to Mecca, constructed hospitals, and patronized scholars. Her wealth came from property she owned independently, managed through agents and administrators who answered to her alone. When she spoke at court, even the Caliph listened. Other royal women maintained similar autonomy, corresponding with governors, funding construction projects, and influencing appointments to key positions. The literary salons of elite women rivaled those hosted by men. Educated noblewomen gathered to recite poetry, debate philosophy, and discuss the latest manuscripts arriving from distant cities. Some became renowned poets themselves. Walid bint al-Mustakfi would later scandalize and captivate Cordoba, but Baghdad pioneered this tradition of literate, outspoken women whose verses circulated throughout the Islamic world. These women memorized thousands of lines of classical poetry and composed their own works that men studied and quoted. Female scholars taught both women and men in certain contexts. Some specialized in hadith, the collected sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, becoming authorities whose authentication of religious texts carried weight in legal debates. Others focused on medicine, treating female patients in a society that valued modesty. A woman seeking medical care would often prefer another woman's examination, creating professional opportunities for female physicians and midwives who commanded respect and substantial fees. Yet for every influential noblewoman, thousands lived constrained lives. Ordinary women managed households, raised children, and rarely ventured beyond their neighborhoods. They bought goods from female vendors in women's markets, separate from the main bazaars where men conducted business. Poorer women worked as servants, washerwomen, and seamstresses, their labor essential but largely invisible in historical records. Widows without family support faced particular hardship, dependent on charity or whatever work their limited mobility permitted. The harem system created another distinct category. Slave women purchased for households served as concubines, entertainers, and domestic workers. The most beautiful and talented might rise to influence if they bore sons to powerful men, transforming from property to political players. Many received extensive education in music, poetry, and conversation, their training making them sophisticated companions. Yet this gilded cage remained a cage. These women lived at the mercy of masters who could sell them or set them aside on whim. Some slave women became legendary performers, their singing voices and musical skills celebrated throughout the city. They performed at private gatherings, their presence adding prestige to any occasion. A talented singing slave might cost thousands of dinars, an investment reflecting both artistic value and social status. When masters freed favored slaves, these women sometimes became wealthy in their own right, though always marked by their origins. The variety of women's experiences in Baghdad resists simple summary. Royal women commissioned buildings while slaves scrubbed floors in those same structures. Scholars debated law while laundresses washed clothes in the Tigris. Female poets composed verses while farm women outside the walls harvested dates. Each occupied a different Baghdad, yet all contributed to the city's extraordinary character during its golden age. The gardens along the Tigris came alive after sunset. Lanterns hung from fruit trees, casting dancing shadows across elaborate carpets spread beneath. Servants circulated with pitchers of wine, forbidden by religious law yet flowing freely at these gatherings of the wealthy and cultured. This was the majlis, the salon gathering that defined sophisticated life in 9th and 10th century Baghdad. At the center of every successful majlis sat poets, competing for honor and gold. When Abu Nuwas rose to recite, conversations hushed. He was the era's most notorious and celebrated poet, equally famous for his scandalous lifestyle and his breathtaking verses. While religious scholars preached abstinence, Abu Nuwas composed odes to wine that would echo through Arabic literature for centuries. His poetry transformed drinking from sin to aesthetic experience. He described wine as older than Adam, comparing aged vintages to liquid gold and captured sunlight. His verses painted scenes of dawn drinking sessions. Cups passed between friends as the city awakened. The forbidden nature of these acts only heightened their appeal. Young nobles memorized his poems, recited them at their own gatherings, and tried desperately to imitate his style. Few succeeded. Abu Nuwas possessed a linguistic virtuosity that made complex meter seem effortless, weaving puns and double meanings that delighted audiences even as they shocked the pious. Music provided the other pillar of pleasure culture. At elite gatherings, professional musicians performed on the oud, a pear-shaped lute that became the era's dominant instrument. Master performers like Ibrahim al-Mawsili and his son Ishaq revolutionized Arabic music, developing new modes and compositional techniques. They experimented with rhythm patterns, creating intricate cycles that challenged and thrilled listeners. Their innovations spread from Baghdad to every corner of the Islamic world. Female singers commanded particular attention and astronomical fees. Highly trained and phenomenally expensive, these performers combined poetry, melody, and dramatic presence in ways that audiences found irresistible. A singer might interpret ancient verses or debut new compositions, her voice accompanied by the oud's resonant strings and the percussion of the tambourine. The greatest performers earned fortunes and influenced fashion, their jewels and clothing styles copied throughout the city. Taverns offered pleasure culture for those of lesser means. Near the markets and along the waterfront, establishments served wine despite repeated attempts by authorities to close them. Here, merchants and craftsmen gathered after work, drinking cheap vintages and listening to lesser-known poets trying to make names for themselves. The atmosphere was rowdier, the entertainment cruder, but the essential pattern remained: wine, poetry, music, and conversation mixing in ways that religious authorities found deeply troubling. That tension between pleasure and piety defined the age. Scholars denounced wine drinking in their sermons, even as caliphs hosted elaborate drinking parties at court. Religious judges who spent their days ruling on points of Islamic law might spend their evenings at gatherings where cups circulated freely. Some poets like Abu Nuwas composed equally brilliant religious verses, their piety apparently coexisting with their libertine lifestyles. This duality reflected Baghdad's unique character. The city served as the capital of an Islamic empire and center of religious scholarship. Yet its wealth and cosmopolitan culture created spaces for pleasure that would have scandalized the Prophet's earliest companions. The tension never resolved itself. Instead, it generated an artistic flowering that transformed Arabic literature and music. As the 10th century progressed, the parties continued even as the Caliphate's political power waned. The poetry and music developed in these gardens and taverns would outlast the empire itself. Water defined Baghdad from the moment of its founding. When Caliph al-Mansur chose the site in 762, he selected a location where the Tigris curved gently, providing natural protection and access to the river's life-giving flow. But the Tigris alone was not enough. Baghdad would need an elaborate system to transform desert into paradise. Engineers immediately began excavating canals. The Nar Iza, dug within the city's first decade, connected the Tigris to the Euphrates, creating a water highway that facilitated trade and irrigation. Dozens of smaller canals branched from this main artery, spreading through neighborhoods like veins. Water flowed along carefully calculated gradients, reaching districts that would otherwise have remained barren dust. The engineering required constant attention. Silt accumulated in canal beds, reducing flow and threatening the entire system. Each spring, before the summer heat arrived, teams of workers dredged channels and reinforced banks. City administrators hired surveyors who used primitive but effective leveling instruments to ensure proper water flow. A miscalculation of even a few inches could leave entire neighborhoods parched. Water wheels dominated the riverfront. These massive wooden structures, some reaching 40 feet in diameter, scooped water from the Tigris and delivered it to elevated aqueducts. The wheels turned day and night, their creaking audible across the city. The technology had Persian origins, but Baghdadi engineers expanded and refined it, creating wheels of unprecedented size and efficiency. Each wheel could lift thousands of gallons daily, feeding fountains in palaces and irrigation channels in gardens. Commerce transformed the river into a highway. Boats of every size crowded the waterfront from dawn to dusk. Small ferries shuttled passengers across the current for a few copper coins. Cargo vessels with shallow drafts brought goods from the Persian Gulf, their holds packed with spices, textiles, and exotic woods. Rafts made from inflated animal skins floated downstream carrying produce from upstream farms, their owners planning to sell both cargo and raft materials in the city markets before walking home. The riverfront districts bustled with specialized activity. Boat builders hammered in riverside workshops, constructing vessels using techniques passed through generations. Fishermen cast nets in the shallows, pulling up the river carp and catfish that fed thousands. Water carriers filled leather bags and sold them through the streets to households without direct canal access. Yet the Tigris could turn deadly. Spring floods threatened the city when mountain snowmelt swelled the current. In particularly severe years, water breached canal banks and inundated low-lying neighborhoods. Residents built houses with storage on upper floors, knowing ground levels might flood. City authorities maintained emergency dikes and employed watchers during flood season to raise alarms if the river rose dangerously. The canal system enabled Baghdad's legendary gardens. Date palms lined every waterway, their roots drinking from channels while their fronds provided shade. Wealthy families cultivated gardens featuring roses, jasmine, and fruit trees. The famous Round City Gardens required armies of gardeners who managed irrigation schedules with precision, ensuring each plant received optimal water. Water made Baghdad possible. Without the engineering that channeled the Tigris through the city, the desert would have reclaimed it within a generation. The sick arrived at Baghdad's hospitals regardless of their wealth, religion, or social standing. Beginning in the early 9th century, the Bimaristan system offered something revolutionary: free medical care as a public right rather than private privilege. The first major hospital opened under Caliph Harun al-Rashid around 805, setting a precedent that would spread throughout the Islamic world. These were not crude infirmaries. Baghdad's hospitals featured separate wards for different conditions. Patients with fevers occupied one section, those with eye diseases another, surgical cases a third. Each ward had its own staff of physicians and attendants. The larger hospitals contained lecture halls where senior doctors taught students, libraries housing medical texts, and pharmacies where specialists prepared medications according to precise recipes. Women physicians practiced alongside men, treating female patients who might refuse care from male doctors. This practical necessity created opportunities unavailable in most other medieval societies. Female doctors specialized particularly in obstetrics and gynecology, accumulating knowledge passed between generations of practitioners. Hospital physicians underwent rigorous training. A student might spend years studying anatomy, pharmacology, and diagnostic techniques before treating patients independently. The chief physician examined candidates, testing their knowledge through oral questioning and practical demonstrations. Only after this examination could they receive a license to practice. This licensing system, formalized in the early 10th century, represented one of history's first attempts to regulate medical practice and protect patients from incompetent healers. Mental illness received particular attention. Rather than chaining or imprisoning the mentally disturbed, Baghdad's hospitals created specialized facilities. Patients lived in quiet wards where they received regular meals, medication, and music therapy. Physicians recognized that mental conditions required treatment rather than punishment, a perspective that would not become common in Europe for centuries. Pharmacology advanced dramatically. Muslim physicians could not dissect human corpses due to religious prohibitions, limiting anatomical knowledge. They compensated by becoming expert pharmacologists. Hospital pharmacies stocked hundreds of substances: herbs from India, minerals from Persia, compounds derived through distillation and mixing. Pharmacists recorded precise dosages and preparation methods in detailed texts. These texts revolutionized medical knowledge. Physicians wrote comprehensive works describing diseases, symptoms, and treatments. They carefully documented which remedies proved effective and which failed. One physician might record the progression of smallpox through a patient population, noting which treatments reduced mortality. Another might describe surgical techniques for removing cataracts. These texts circulated between hospitals and cities, creating a growing body of shared medical knowledge. The hospitals also served teaching functions. Senior physicians conducted rounds, bringing students to examine patients and observe symptoms. They posed diagnostic questions, forcing students to reason through problems. This clinical education, combining book learning with practical experience, trained generations of skilled doctors. Hospital funding came from religious endowments and state treasuries. Wealthy individuals often designated properties whose rental income would support medical facilities in perpetuity. This system ensured hospitals could offer free care while maintaining high standards. Baghdad's commitment to public health reflected a broader philosophy. Caring for the sick represented both religious duty and civic responsibility. By the middle of the 9th century, cracks began appearing in the foundations of Abbasid power. The caliphs who had once commanded an empire stretching from Spain to India found their authority challenged not by distant rebels, but by the very soldiers meant to protect them. The trouble centered in Samarra, the new capital built 40 years earlier to house the caliph's expanding Turkish slave army. These Mamluks, purchased as boys from Central Asian steppes and trained as elite warriors, proved dangerously effective. They understood their own indispensability. Between 861 and 870, 4 caliphs died violently, 3 murdered by their own Turkish guards. The soldiers elevated and deposed rulers at will, treating the caliphate as their personal property. This period, known as the anarchy at Samarra, shattered the illusion of centralized power. Provincial governors watched the chaos and drew conclusions. If Turkish generals could make and unmake caliphs, why should distant provinces remain loyal? Tax revenues from outlying regions slowed to a trickle. Egypt, North Africa, and Eastern Persia began operating as independent states in all but name, their governors sending only token acknowledgement to Baghdad. The Caliph al-Mu'tamid finally abandoned Samarra in 892, returning to Baghdad. But the Turkish military commanders came too, their power undiminished. They now controlled not just the palace guard but the highest government offices. Real authority rested with military strongmen who held the title of Emir al-Amara, commander of commanders. Caliphs became ceremonial figures, signing documents prepared by others, lending religious legitimacy to decisions made by soldiers. Meanwhile, a different threat erupted in southern Iraq. The Zanj Rebellion, beginning in 869, saw enslaved African laborers rise against brutal conditions in the salt marshes below Basra. For 14 years, these rebels held territory, raided cities, and challenged Abbasid armies. Though eventually crushed in 883, the rebellion devastated the agricultural heartland that fed Baghdad. Villages burned, irrigation systems collapsed, fields returned to marsh and desert. The economic consequences rippled through the capital. Food prices climbed as supplies diminished. The government, already struggling with reduced tax income, debased the currency, mixing base metals with silver. Merchants and artisans found their savings worthless. International traders began avoiding Baghdad's markets, seeking more stable commercial centers in Cairo or Damascus. Population declined as opportunity disappeared. Wealthy families moved their households to provincial cities where local rulers maintained order and prosperity. Scholars accepted positions at courts in Bukhara or Cordoba. Skilled craftsmen sought patrons elsewhere. Entire neighborhoods emptied. The round city's markets, once packed with buyers haggling over goods from 3 continents, grew quiet. By 945, the caliphs controlled little beyond Baghdad's walls. That year, the Buwayhid dynasty, Shia Muslims from northern Persia, marched into the capital. The caliph, a Sunni figurehead commanding neither army nor treasury, could only watch as new overlords claimed power. The Buwayhids allowed him to remain, preserving the fiction of Abbasid authority while exercising real control themselves. The Golden Age had ended not with dramatic conquest, but through slow dissolution. The institutions that made Baghdad great, its hospitals, libraries, and schools, continued functioning. Scholars still studied, physicians still healed. But the city's position as the undisputed center of Islamic civilization had passed. New powers were rising across the Muslim world, and Baghdad's centuries of dominance were fading into memory. The Buwayhids entered Baghdad not as conquerors, but as saviors, or so they claimed. Ahmad ibn Buya, known by his honorific title Muizz al-Dawla, arrived with his Persian army, answering a desperate call from the powerless caliph. Turkish commanders had torn themselves apart in factional fighting, leaving government paralyzed. The Caliph al-Mustakfi, barely able to pay his household staff, welcomed the Buwayhid general as a stabilizing force. Within months, Muizz al-Dawla controlled everything that mattered. The arrangement suited both parties initially. The Buwayhids gained legitimacy through association with the Caliph, the symbol of Sunni orthodoxy recognized across the Muslim world. The Caliph kept his palace, his stipend, and his ceremonial duties. He led Friday prayers, blessed official documents, received visiting dignitaries. But actual governance, military command, tax collection, judicial appointments, all passed to the Buwayhid emirs who ruled from their own court. This created a peculiar dynamic. The Buwayhids practiced Shia Islam, venerating Ali and his descendants as the rightful heirs to Muhammad. The caliph they protected represented the Sunni tradition that rejected these claims. Yet pragmatism overcame theology. The Buwayhids needed the caliph's name to validate their rule over a predominantly Sunni population. The caliph needed Buwayhid swords to remain in power at all. Religious tensions simmered beneath this political compromise. The Buwayhids introduced public mourning for Imam Hussein, killed at Karbala centuries earlier, turning the commemoration into elaborate street processions through Baghdad. They established Shia judges in the courts and granted prominent positions to Shia scholars. Some neighborhoods flew black banners of Shia mourning during the month of Muharram, while Sunni areas responded with their own displays of loyalty to the early caliphs that Shias rejected. Riots occasionally erupted between Shia and Sunni factions, particularly during religious festivals. Markets became battlegrounds as competing mobs clashed with sticks, stones, and knives. The Buwayhid authorities usually intervened to restore order, but their very presence reminded everyone that traditional hierarchies had inverted. A Sunni caliph now served at the pleasure of Shia overlords. Yet paradoxically, Baghdad flourished intellectually during Buwayhid rule. The emirs, though military men by trade, fancied themselves patrons of learning. They funded libraries, endowed colleges, commissioned translations of Greek and Persian texts. Literary salons multiplied as courtiers competed to sponsor poets and philosophers. The great scholar Miskawayh wrote his influential ethical treatises under Buwayhid patronage. Abu Hayyan al-Tawhidi produced philosophical works debating the nature of knowledge and virtue. This cultural renaissance reflected Persian influences filtering into Arab Baghdad. The Buwayhids brought administrative traditions from their homeland, love of Persian poetry and epic tales, architectural styles featuring high arches and decorated domes. Arabic literature absorbed these elements, creating a hybrid culture that enriched both traditions. The caliphs, stripped of temporal power, found unexpected freedom. Unable to command armies or raise taxes, they devoted themselves to scholarship, poetry, and religious study. Some proved surprisingly talented. Their courts attracted intellectuals who appreciated this scholarly atmosphere, even as actual government occurred elsewhere. The streets of Baghdad erupted in celebration when Tughril Beg rode through the gates in December 1055. Citizens lined the avenues, cheering the arrival of the Seljuk Turkish leader who promised to restore proper order after a century of Buwayhid rule. The Caliph al-Qaim, desperate to escape the humiliation of serving under Shia overlords, had invited Tughril as his champion. Within weeks, the last Buwayhid emir fled westward, ending the Persian interlude that had so troubled Sunni orthodoxy. Tughril understood the power of symbolism. He prostrated himself before the caliph in a dramatic public ceremony, kissing the ground and proclaiming his loyalty to the commander of the faithful. The caliph, nearly weeping with relief, bestowed upon him the title Sultan, meaning authority. For the first time in generations, a Sunni military commander controlled Baghdad while genuflecting, at least ceremonially, to caliphal supremacy. The arrangement satisfied conservative religious scholars who had chafed under Buwayhid toleration of Shia practices. The Seljuks moved quickly to cement Sunni dominance. They closed Shia colleges, banned public mourning ceremonies for Hussein, and appointed Orthodox judges to all major courts. The black banners of Shia commemoration vanished from neighborhoods where they had flown for decades. Some communities resisted, particularly in the Kark district where Shia populations concentrated, but Seljuk soldiers enforced the new order with methodical efficiency. Yet, the most lasting Seljuk contribution came not through suppression but through education. The vizier Nizam al-Mulk, serving under Tughril's successor, conceived an ambitious project to standardize Islamic learning across the empire. Beginning in 1067, he established a network of colleges called Nizamiya Madrasas, with the flagship institution rising in Baghdad itself. These schools taught a carefully curated curriculum: Shafi'i law, Ash'ari theology, Arabic grammar, logic, mathematics, producing generations of scholars trained in approved doctrines. The Baghdad Nizamiya became the model Islamic college, its methods copied from Andalusia to Central Asia. Students received stipends, free lodging, and instruction from renowned professors. The great theologian al-Ghazali taught there, wrestling with questions of faith and reason that had troubled Muslim intellectuals for centuries. His synthesis of mysticism and orthodoxy, developed in these lecture halls, would shape Islamic thought for generations. But something essential had changed in Baghdad. The city survived, functioning as an administrative center and educational hub, yet the creative explosion of the Abbasid Golden Age never returned. Trade routes had shifted, devastating the economy. Repeated conflicts had destroyed neighborhoods that never fully rebuilt. The population, perhaps 400,000 at its height, had shrunk by half. Visitors in the 12th century reported a city of faded grandeur. The round city walls crumbled in sections. Palaces stood empty, their gardens overgrown. Markets still operated, but sold fewer exotic goods from distant lands. Baghdad endured as a symbol, its name still resonating across the Muslim world, but the reality no longer matched the legend. The caliphs remained, the mosque still called the faithful to prayer, but the city that had once dazzled the world with its wealth and learning had become merely another provincial capital in someone else's empire. Caliph al-Nasir al-Din Allah ascended the throne in 1180, inheriting a city diminished in grandeur but not in symbolic importance. Unlike his recent predecessors who had accepted ceremonial irrelevance, al-Nasir possessed ambitions that startled observers. The Seljuk sultans had fragmented into quarreling regional powers, creating and opening this 30-year-old caliph intended to exploit. For the first time in 2 centuries, a commander of the faithful would attempt to rule, not merely reign. Al-Nasir rebuilt Baghdad's military forces, recruiting Turkish Mamluks and training them in the latest cavalry tactics. He fortified the city walls, sections of which had stood in disrepair since the Buwayhid era. Tax revenues increased as his administrators imposed order on surrounding provinces. By 1200, he controlled territories stretching from the Persian Gulf to northern Mesopotamia, a genuine political force rather than a religious figurehead. The transformation astonished contemporaries who had grown accustomed to powerless caliphs. He also revived an obscure Muslim brotherhood called the Futuwah, transforming it into something resembling European chivalric orders. Members swore oaths of loyalty, wore distinctive garments, and followed elaborate codes of conduct. Al-Nasir himself underwent initiation ceremonies, then extended membership to sultans and emirs across the Muslim world. Some accepted, seeking legitimacy through association with the caliphate. Others watched suspiciously as Baghdad's influence expanded through these networks of ritual brotherhood. The city enjoyed relative prosperity during these decades. Markets hummed with activity. Scholars filled the Nizamiya Madrasa lecture halls. New neighborhoods sprouted beyond the old boundaries as populations recovered. Visitors remarked on improved security along trade routes. For a generation, Baghdad resembled its former self, not matching the glory days but functioning as a proper capital rather than a decaying monument. Yet beyond the eastern horizon, forces gathered that would render these achievements tragically irrelevant. Mongol horsemen, united under Genghis Khan, swept across Central Asia in campaigns of methodical devastation. Cities that resisted vanished, their populations slaughtered, their libraries burned. By 1220, the Mongols controlled territories from China to Persia, and their western expansion showed no signs of stopping. Baghdad heard rumors, fragmentary reports filtering through terrified merchants. Entire armies annihilated in days. Fortified cities reduced to rubble. But the Tigris still flowed, the markets still traded, and daily life continued its familiar rhythms. The danger seemed abstract, distant, surely exaggerated. Caliphal Mustasim, who succeeded to the throne in 1242, inherited his predecessor's revived authority, but possessed none of his political acumen. He surrounded himself with advisors who assured him of Baghdad's invulnerability. The city's walls, recently strengthened, would withstand any siege. The Mongols, exhausted from decades of conquest, would surely negotiate. Al-Mustasim collected books and patronized poets, while his vizier Ibn al-Alqami pursued mysterious correspondence with Mongol commanders. When Hulagu Khan demanded submission in 1257, sending ambassadors with ultimatums, al-Mustasim wavered. Some counselors urged immediate capitulation. Others insisted the commander of the faithful could never bow to infidel horsemen. Military commanders debated whether Baghdad's 40,000 defenders could repel the approaching army. Months passed in indecision while Mongol forces assembled in Persia, preparing for a campaign that would finally extinguish the light that had burned beside the Tigris for 5 centuries. The Mongol army appeared on the eastern horizon in January of 1258, a force unlike anything Baghdad had ever faced. Contemporary chronicles struggle to capture their numbers, some claiming 100,000, others 200,000, but all agreed the earth itself seemed to move as horsemen covered the plains beyond the Tigris. Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, had spent months preparing for this moment, assembling siege engineers from across his empire, bringing specialized equipment designed to reduce the mightiest fortifications to dust. The siege began with methodical precision. Mongol forces encircled Baghdad completely, cutting every route of escape or resupply. Chinese engineers supervised construction of siege engines, massive trebuchets that began hurling stones at the city walls. Armenian and Georgian auxiliaries dug trenches and erected palisades. This was not a raid or a punitive expedition, but a calculated operation of annihilation. Hulagu had sent his message months earlier. Baghdad had refused submission. The consequence would be absolute. Inside the walls, panic spread as defenders realized their predicament. The 40,000 garrison troops, many recent recruits, watched the systematic preparations with growing dread. Caliph al-Mustasim convened urgent councils where advisors offered contradictory proposals. Some still advocated negotiation. Others demanded a sortie to disrupt the siege works. But unity of command had collapsed. Factions blamed each other for the crisis, and precious days evaporated in recrimination. By late January, the bombardment intensified. Stones crashed through rooftops, killing families huddled in their homes. Sections of wall began crumbling under relentless assault. On February 5th, Mongol forces breached the eastern fortifications. Defenders fought desperately at the gaps, but Mongol discipline and numerical superiority proved overwhelming. Within hours, horsemen poured through multiple breaches. The city's fate was sealed. What followed defies adequate description. Hulagu had ordered total destruction, and his commanders executed those instructions with terrifying thoroughness. Soldiers moved systematically through neighborhoods, killing every inhabitant they encountered. Men, women, children, the elderly, none received mercy. Contemporary historians, writing in the siege's aftermath, estimated the dead at between 200,000 and 1 million souls. Modern scholars consider the lower figure more credible, but even that represents catastrophe on an almost incomprehensible scale. The House of Wisdom, repository of centuries of accumulated knowledge, burned for days. Manuscripts that had survived the centuries, irreplaceable texts of philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and poetry, fed flames that turned the sky black. Witnesses later claimed the Tigris ran red with blood on one side, black with ink on the other, as countless volumes were dumped into the river. Whether literally true or symbolic exaggeration, the image captures what was lost: knowledge that could never be recovered, intellectual heritage obliterated. Caliphal Mustasim himself survived the initial massacre, captured and brought before Hulagu Khan. The Mongol commander reportedly demanded to know where Baghdad's treasures were hidden. When the Caliph revealed his storehouses, Hulagu expressed contempt. Why had al-Mustasim not used this wealth to build armies and buy peace? The Caliph had no answer. On February 20th, approximately 2 weeks after the city fell, Hulagu ordered his execution. Mongol custom forbade spilling royal blood, so soldiers wrapped the Caliph in carpets and trampled him to death with horses. The Abbasid Caliphate, established in 750 when Abu al-Abbas defeated the Umayyads, ended after 508 years. Baghdad, the city of peace founded by al-Mansur to be Islam's eternal capital, lay in ruins. Survivors wandered through streets choked with corpses, past buildings reduced to shells, through a silence broken only by scavenging dogs and circling vultures. Hulagu Khan departed after ensuring nothing could rise from these ashes. He left behind a wasteland, a cautionary tale, a wound in Islamic civilization that would never fully heal. The Golden Age was finished, not with gradual decline, but sudden, brutal finality. The dust settled on a city transformed into a graveyard. Of Baghdad's estimated population of perhaps 800,000 before the siege, fewer than 100,000 remained alive. Those survivors faced a landscape unrecognizable from the metropolis that had dazzled travelers for 5 centuries. The great markets lay silent. The palaces stood gutted. Irrigation canals, their maintenance systems destroyed, began silting up and breaking, turning fertile gardens into marshland and desert. Mongol governors ruled what remained of Baghdad for the next 3 centuries, but the city they administered bore little resemblance to its former self. Population estimates from 1300 suggest perhaps 50,000 residents, a fraction of the pre-conquest numbers. The intellectual infrastructure that had made Baghdad synonymous with learning simply vanished. No patronage existed for scholars. No libraries housed collections. No observatories tracked celestial movements. Survivors focused on the immediate necessities of existence, not philosophical inquiry. Yet something remarkable occurred even as Baghdad languished. The knowledge that had flourished here refused to die. Texts translated in the House of Wisdom centuries earlier had already spread throughout the Mediterranean world. Arabic versions of Aristotle, Euclid, and Ptolemy had traveled to Cordoba and Toledo, where Christian and Jewish scholars translated them into Latin. Greek medical knowledge preserved by Baghdad's physicians reached Salerno and Montpellier. Al-Khwarizmi's algebra, Ibn al-Haytham's optics, and countless other works produced during Baghdad's Golden Age circulated in European universities. When Renaissance scholars in Florence, Venice, and Paris sought to recover classical knowledge, they often worked from Arabic texts that Baghdad's translators had preserved. The astronomical tables that helped Columbus navigate came from calculations perfected in Baghdad's observatories. The mathematical concepts that enabled double-entry bookkeeping and European commerce derived from treatises written along the Tigris. Even as the city itself remained a shadow, its intellectual legacy shaped the rebirth of European learning. Baghdad experienced periodic revivals. While Ottoman control beginning in 1534 brought some stability and modest prosperity, the city became a provincial capital, maintaining trade routes between Persia and the Mediterranean. Sufi shrines attracted pilgrims. Neighborhoods slowly repopulated. But these recoveries never approached the heights of the Abbasid era. Political power had shifted permanently. Cairo, Istanbul, Isfahan claimed the prominence Baghdad once held. The 20th century brought new transformations. British occupation after the First World War, independence and the formation of modern Iraq, oil wealth and modernization, dictatorship and war. Contemporary Baghdad, with its 7 million residents, sprawls far beyond the medieval city walls. Modern buildings tower where the House of Wisdom once stood. The Tigris still flows through the city center, but the round city of Al-Mansur exists only in archaeological traces. What endures is memory and influence. Historians studying medieval Baghdad recover a model of cosmopolitan civilization where Persian bureaucrats, Arab poets, Christian translators, and Jewish physicians collaborated in common enterprise. The city demonstrated that diverse peoples could forge shared culture, that intellectual achievement transcended religious boundaries, that urban prosperity depended on tolerance and exchange. The catastrophe of 1258 reminds us how fragile such achievements remain. A single military campaign erased centuries of accumulated knowledge. The ransacking of libraries destroyed texts that can never be recovered. We possess fragments of what Baghdad created, tantalizing glimpses of intellectual riches forever lost. Yet fragments suffice to recognize Baghdad's place in human history. For 5 centuries, this city on the Tigris served as a beacon of learning, a marketplace of ideas, a workshop where ancient wisdom was preserved and transformed. The questions asked in its study halls, the methods developed in its hospitals, the calculations performed in its observatories helped build the modern world. Every time we use algebra, read translated Greek philosophy, or benefit from scientific medicine, we inherit something of medieval Baghdad's legacy. The Golden Age ended, but its light still reaches us across the centuries, a reminder of what humanity can achieve when curiosity flourishes and knowledge flows freely across borders and beliefs. Baghdad's Golden Age reminds us that humanity's greatest achievements bloom when knowledge crosses borders and curiosity knows no bounds. Subscribe to explore more forgotten worlds that shaped our own.